The crowd gasped in unified shock as Lady Constance's hand connected with Evelyn's cheek. The sharp crack of the slap echoed across the Duke of Weatherby's immaculate garden, silencing aristocratic chatter and birdsong alike. But before anyone could process what they'd witnessed, before the sting had fully registered on Evelyn's burning skin, a commanding presence materialized between them. The Duke of Weatherby, Alexander Ashford, caught Lady Constance's wrist mid-air as she raised her hand for a second strike. His grip was iron wrapped in silk, unyielding yet controlled. He leaned close to the older woman, his voice carrying a chill that seemed to lower the temperature of the entire garden. "That was your last mistake." Evelyn stood frozen, one hand pressed to her throbbing cheek, tears stinging her eyes as she registered the shocked faces surrounding them. The cream of London society had just witnessed her humiliation. Her stepmother, Lady Constance, stood trembling with rage, her carefully maintained mask of civility shattered, and between them stood the Duke, a man she'd never formally met, whose intervention would change everything. 6 months. That's how long it had been since Evelyn's father, Lord Edmund Hargrave, had died, leaving her at the mercy of a stepmother who saw her as nothing more than a financial asset to be liquidated. 6 months of systematic cruelty, of watching her inheritance being plundered, of being treated like livestock to be sold to the highest bidder. But this moment, this public, scandalous, utterly unprecedented moment, would become the catalyst for Evelyn's transformation from captive to free woman, from silent victim to someone who would reclaim not just her estate, but her very self. As Alexander's grey eyes met hers with unexpected gentleness, Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't the rescue she'd dreamed of during those dark months under Constance's control. This was something far more dangerous, the beginning of a choice she would have to make for herself. If you're captivated by Evelyn's story of courage and transformation, please hit that like button. Your support helps me bring you more tales of resilience and romance. And in the comments below, tell me, have you ever witnessed someone stand up to injustice in a moment that changed everything? I read every comment. The morning had begun like every other since her father's death, with criticism and control. Evelyn sat across from Lady Constance at breakfast, wearing a lavender dress that had once been her favorite, but now represented another battleground. "Absolutely not," Constance declared, her fork clattering against fine china. "That color makes you look sallow, and the neckline is far too severe. Lord Whitmore will think you're a prude." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her teacup. Lord Henry Whitmore, the man Constance had selected as her future husband without consulting her, a second son with gambling debts and a desperate need for an heiress to salvage his circumstances. "The dress is perfectly appropriate," Evelyn said quietly, though she knew protest was futile. "I'll determine what's appropriate in my household." Constance's ice-blue eyes narrowed. "Your father spoiled you, filled your head with ridiculous notions about women managing estates and making decisions, but Edmund is dead, and his fantasies died with him." Each word landed like a physical blow. This was Constance's favorite weapon, invoking Evelyn's father's name, using his memory to wound rather than comfort. Across the table, Beatrice kept her gaze fixed on her plate. Evelyn's 19-year-old stepsister had perfected the art of invisibility during these exchanges. She'd grown up under Constance's control and knew no other way. "Your posture, Evelyn," Constance continued, conducting her symphony of criticism with practiced precision. "You slouch like a scullery maid. And must you butter your toast so vigorously? A lady takes delicate bites." Evelyn set down her knife, her appetite vanishing. This was her life now. Every movement monitored, every choice dictated, every spark of independence systematically extinguished. Later, in her father's study, Evelyn held his pocket watch, tracing the engraved inscription that had become her talisman. "Time reveals all truth, my darling girl." "What truth has time revealed, Papa? That I'm trapped? That I'm powerless?" She thought of the garden party scheduled for 3 days hence, an event where Constance planned to parade her before Lord Whitmore like prize livestock. 3 more years until she turned 25 and gained control of her inheritance. 3 more years of this suffocating existence. Or she could marry Lord Whitmore and trade one form of captivity for another. Under English law, everything she owned would become his property the moment she spoke her vows. As evening shadows lengthened across the study, Evelyn made a decision. She would attend the garden party. She would endure Constance's machinations, but she would not surrender herself entirely. The morning of the garden party arrived with unseasonable warmth. Evelyn dressed in the cream day dress Constance had mandated, its lower neckline making her feel exposed and uncomfortable. She pulled her father's pocket watch from beneath her bodice, where it hung on a gold chain, drawing strength from its familiar weight. The carriage ride to Wetherby was silent and tense. Constance sat across from Evelyn, periodically adjusting her daughter's appearance with sharp tugs and dissatisfied clicks of her tongue. "Snile more," Constance instructed, as the estate came into view. "Lord Whitmore values pleasant disposition in a wife. And for heaven's sake, let him dominate the conversation. Men don't appreciate women with too many opinions." Wetherby was magnificent, a sprawling estate with gardens that were legendary throughout England. As their carriage joined the queue of vehicles depositing London's elite, Evelyn caught her first glimpse of the Duke. Alexander Ashford stood on the stone terrace, surveying his guests with a detached assessment of someone performing a tiresome duty. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 31, with dark hair showing premature silver at the temples. His features were aristocratic but lived in, marked by responsibility rather than indulgence. For just a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps, though they'd never been formally introduced. Then he turned to greet other arrivals, and Evelyn dismissed it as wishing thinking. "There's Lord Whitmore," Constance said with satisfaction, her grip tightening on Evelyn's elbow as they crossed the lawn. "Remember what I told you. Be agreeable, be charming. Your future depends on this match." Lord Whitmore was handsome in a calculated way, perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive tailoring that couldn't quite hide his dissolute lifestyle. He greeted them with practiced courtesy, his eyes conducting a swift assessment of Evelyn's financial worth. "Lady Evelyn," he said, bowing with theatrical flourish, "I was deeply sorry to hear of your father's passing, a gentleman of great distinction." The conversation that followed was excruciating. Whitmore held forth about his accomplishments, while Constance laughed at his jokes with false delight. Evelyn set down her knife, her appetite vanishing. This was her life now, every movement monitored, every choice dictated, every spark of independence systematically extinguished. Later, in her father's study, Evelyn held his pocket watch, tracing the engraved inscription that had become her talisman. "Time reveals all truth, my darling girl." "What truth has time revealed, Papa? That I'm trapped? That I'm powerless?" She thought of the garden party scheduled for 3 days hence, an event where Constance planned to parade her before Lord Whitmore like prize livestock. 3 more years until she turned 25 and gained control of her inheritance. 3 more years of this suffocating existence. Or she could marry Lord Whitmore and trade one form of captivity for another. Under English law, everything she owned would become his property the moment she spoke her vows. As evening shadows lengthened across the study, Evelyn made a decision. She would attend the garden party. She would endure Constance's machinations, but she would not surrender herself entirely. The morning of the garden party arrived with unseasonable warmth. Evelyn dressed in the cream day dress Constance had mandated, its lower neckline making her feel exposed and uncomfortable. She pulled her father's pocket watch from beneath her bodice, where it hung on a gold chain, drawing strength from its familiar weight. The carriage ride to Wetherby was silent and tense. Constance sat across from Evelyn, periodically adjusting her daughter's appearance with sharp tugs and dissatisfied clicks of her tongue. "Smile more," Constance instructed, as the estate came into view. "Lord Whitmore values pleasant disposition in a wife, and for heaven's sake, let him dominate the conversation. Men don't appreciate women with too many opinions." Wetherby was magnificent, a sprawling estate with gardens that were legendary throughout England. As their carriage joined the queue of vehicles depositing London's elite, Evelyn caught her first glimpse of the Duke. Alexander Ashford stood on the stone terrace, surveying his guests with a detached assessment of someone performing a tiresome duty. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 31, with dark hair showing premature silver at the temples. His features were aristocratic but lived in, marked by responsibility rather than indulgence. For just a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps, though they'd never been formally introduced. Then he turned to greet other arrivals, and Evelyn dismissed it as wishing thinking. "There's Lord Whitmore," Constance said with satisfaction, her grip tightening on Evelyn's elbow as they crossed the lawn. "Remember what I told." The rose garden was meant to be sanctuary, a place to escape Lord Whitmore's presumptuous comments and the suffocating weight of Constance's expectations. Evelyn pressed trembling fingers against the cool marble of the central fountain, focusing on the sound of trickling water and trying to steady her breathing. "What do you think you're doing?" Constance's voice cut through the tranquility like a blade through silk. Evelyn didn't turn. "I needed air." "You needed air." Constance's footsteps crunched on gravel as she approached, her voice low but venomous. "You walk away from the most advantageous match you're likely to receive, embarrass me in front of the Duke of Wetherby and half of London society, and your explanation is that you needed air? Lord Whitmore is insufferable. Lord Whitmore is perfect." Constance moved into Evelyn's line of sight, her beautiful face twisted with barely contained fury. "Wealthy enough to pay off his debts with your inheritance while leaving me comfortably settled. Desperate enough to overlook your difficult nature. You should be grateful I found anyone willing to take you." The words landed like physical blows, each one designed to wound. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the fountain's edge until her knuckles went white. 6 months of accumulated rage suddenly pressed against her ribs, demanding release. "I won't marry a man who sees me as livestock to be traded." Constance's laugh was sharp and mirthless. "Livestock, you foolish girl. You think you have choices? You think your precious intelligence and your father's outdated notions give you power?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You have nothing. You are nothing without my approval. The law is wrong. The law is reality, and reality is this. You'll marry Lord Whitmore next month, or I'll take alternative measures. I have physicians who will testify to your instability, your hysteria, your dangerous delusions. One signature, Evelyn, and you'll spend the rest of your life in an asylum, staring at walls while I manage your inheritance as I see fit." The threat wasn't empty. Evelyn had heard stories of inconvenient women disappeared behind asylum walls, declared mad by doctors whose loyalty could be purchased. But something inside her snapped. Perhaps it was the casual cruelty in Constance's voice. Perhaps it was the invocation of her father's name like a weapon. Perhaps it was simply 6 months of accumulated grief and rage finally finding their breaking point. "Father would be ashamed of what you've become," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but firm. "He trusted you, and you've spent 6 months dismantling everything he built." Constance's face went white, then red with fury. The slap came without warning, a crack that echoed across the garden like a gunshot, sharp and shocking in the gentle afternoon air. Pain exploded across Evelyn's cheek, hot and stinging. Her head snapped to the side from the force of it, and for a moment the world tilted sideways, roses blurring into sky, the fountain's spray suddenly too loud in her ears. Through watering eyes, she registered details with crystalline clarity, the gasps from nearby guests who'd witnessed the strike, Constance's chest heaving with rage, her stepmother's hand rising again for a second blow. Evelyn flinched, bracing for impact. It never came. Instead, she heard a sharp intake of breath from Constance, followed by a voice so cold it seemed to lower the temperature of the entire garden. That was your last mistake. Evelyn's eyes flew open. The Duke of Wetherby stood between her and Constance, his hand locked around her stepmother's wrist, stopping the descending slap mid-swing. His grip appeared almost casual, but Constance's face had gone pale, suggesting the strength behind it was anything but gentle. The crowd that had been forming at a distance suddenly pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle of a duke intervening in a family dispute. Evelyn could see their faces, shock, curiosity, gleeful anticipation of scandal. This moment would be dissected in drawing rooms across London by evening. "Your Grace," Constance's voice emerged strangled, her social instincts struggling to reassert control. "This is a family matter. The girl is hysterical, ungrateful. She needs discipline." "What she needs," Alexander interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority despite its quiet delivery, "is protection from you." He released Constance's wrist with obvious distaste, then turned to Evelyn. His gray eyes softened fractionally as he took in her tear-stained face and trembling form. "Lady Evelyn, would you do me the honor of joining me for tea? I have matters to discuss regarding your father's estate." Evelyn opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her cheek throbbed, her mind spun. This couldn't be happening. Dukes didn't intervene in domestic disputes. They certainly didn't publicly challenge the guardians of young ladies, no matter the provocation. Before she could formulate a response, Alexander turned back to address the assembled crowd, his voice carrying across the garden with absolute clarity. "Lady Constance, you will leave my property immediately. Lady Evelyn is now under my protection. Her belongings will be collected from Hargrave House tomorrow." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible even over the fountain's splash. This was more than intervention. This was a public claiming of responsibility, nearly scandalous in its implications. "You cannot simply—" Constance's composure cracked completely. "She's my stepdaughter. Legally, I am her guardian until she marries or reaches her majority. You have no right. My solicitor will contact you regarding the legality of your guardianship." Alexander's tone suggested the conversation was finished. "Given what I've just witnessed, I suspect the courts will have questions about your fitness for that role." He offered his arm to Evelyn with the same formal courtesy he might extend to a queen. "Lady Evelyn." The Duke's private study was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with volumes that showed the wear of actual reading rather than decorative display. Alexander guided Evelyn to a pair of wingback chairs positioned before an unlit fireplace, then moved to a sideboard without speaking. He returned with 2 glasses of brandy, offering one to Evelyn with a slight nod. She took it with both hands, kneading them both to hide the shaking. The liquid burned going down, but the warmth spreading through her chest was steadying. Alexander settled into the opposite chair, notably not behind his desk, where authority would tower over her, but across from her at equal height. He didn't speak immediately, didn't rush to fill the silence with platitudes or demands for explanation. He simply sat and waited. The patience undid something in Evelyn's chest. "Thank you," her voice emerged barely steady, "but I don't understand why you intervened. You don't know me. We've never been formally introduced." "I knew your father." The simple statement stopped her mid-thought. "Edmund and I served together on several parliamentary committees, agricultural reform mostly. He had radical ideas about treating farmers as partners rather than subjects." Alexander's expression shifted, something like grief flickering across his features. "I was new to my title, drowning in obligations I never expected to inherit. Your father helped me navigate those early days. He spoke of you constantly, his brilliant daughter who understood estate management better than most men. Evelyn's throat tightened. She could picture it perfectly, her father with his gentle wisdom, seeing the person behind the title. I've attended functions where you were present these past 6 months. Every time I saw a little less of the person your father described. You were fading, Lady Evelyn, disappearing inside yourself. The tears Evelyn had been fighting broke through her defenses. They spilled hot down her cheeks, and she pressed her hand to her mouth to contain the sob building in her chest. Today, when she struck you in front of half of London society, Alexander's jaw tightened. Some things cannot be tolerated. No person deserves that treatment. What do you do now? Evelyn managed. I'm ruined, aren't I? My solicitor, my aunt, Lady Margaret Ashford, resides in the East Wing. She witnessed the entire scene. Her presence ensures propriety. She'll support your version of events should anyone question the circumstances. He leaned forward, his expression serious. There's more you should know. Your father asked me to look after you if anything happened to him. We discussed it 3 months before his death. He had concerns about Constance. The revelation settled over Evelyn like a weight. Her father had known, had tried to protect her even beyond death. Stay here as my guest. My solicitor will review your situation thoroughly. We'll determine how to break Constance's control legally. It was everything she dreamed of during 6 months of captivity. So why did panic flutter in her chest? I won't be a charity case or a project to manage. The words emerged more forcefully than she'd intended. Then let's call this a strategic alliance, Alexander replied without defensiveness. You need legal protection. I need, he paused, something like humor crossing his features, an intelligent conversation partner who isn't trying to manipulate me into
3 weeks at Weatherby transformed Evelyn in ways she couldn't have imagined. The first morning, she woke to birdsong rather than Constance's sharp rapping on her bedroom door. She dressed herself and made her way to the breakfast room, where a sideboard held covered dishes, eggs, bacon, toast, jam, and no one to tell her what she was permitted to eat. She took 2 slices of bacon, then a third, added eggs and toast with real butter, poured coffee and added cream until it was exactly the shade she preferred. It was the most delicious breakfast of her life. The library became her refuge. 3 stories tall, with gallery levels and wheeled ladders, it held thousands of volumes. On her 5th day, Evelyn pulled out Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, a book she'd heard of but never dared request. Radical choice for a Tuesday afternoon, Alexander said from the doorway, an amused smile softening his usually serious features. What began as a conversation about Wollstonecraft evolved into a spirited debate about Tudor politics. Evelyn argued that Catherine of Aragon was the true political genius of her marriage. Alexander countered with Thomas Cromwell's administrative reforms. Their voices rose with enthusiasm, neither giving ground. Alexander found himself watching her face more than tracking the actual debate. The way her eyes lit up when making a point, how she gestured emphatically with her hands. This was the daughter Edmund had described. "Why have you never married, Your Grace?" The question emerged before Evelyn could stop it. "Forgive me, that's terribly forward." "Because every woman presented to me sees the title and the estate," Alexander said quietly. "I wanted someone who sees me." Their eyes met, the silence stretched between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to acknowledge. Lady Margaret arrived on the 10th day and conducted her assessment over tea. "My nephew has avoided entanglement for 6 years," she said without preamble. Then he publicly claims a young woman's protection in a manner so scandalous it's been the talk of every drawing room in London. Tell me, what should I make of this? "Your nephew is honoring a promise to my late father," Evelyn replied carefully. And the way he watches you at dinner is also about honoring promises?" Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks. "Good," Margaret laughed. "He needs someone with spine. But you should know London will be vicious about this. Are you prepared? Evelyn thought of Constance's cruelty, the 6 months of systematic dismantling of her spirit. Lady Constance was vicious too. I survived her. Indeed you did. Margaret's expression hardened. I've already begun spreading my version of events through my correspondence network. By the time I'm finished, Constance Hargrave will find herself persona non grata in every respectable household. The letters from Constance began arriving on the 10th day. The third one made her hands shake. You think the Duke wants you for yourself. He pities you. When he tires of your presence, you'll be ruined and alone. Alexander found her trembling in the library. After reading the letters, his fury was cold and controlled. You know none of this is true, he said, catching her hand, the first time he'd deliberately touched her since the garden. You are not a duty. You are a guest in my home because I respect your father's memory, and because I find your company valuable. 25 days after the garden party, Lady Constance arrived at Wetherby with Lord Whitmore and Sir Edmund Worthing, the local magistrate. Mrs. Hewitt's disapproval was evident as she announced them. Show them to the formal drawing room, Alexander said with careful precision. Ask Lady Margaret and Mr. Worthington to join us, and Mrs. Hewitt, ensure several staff members are present. I want witnesses. Evelyn's hands had gone cold. Sir Edmund Worthing, the magistrate. It seems your stepmother has escalated her campaign. Alexander's voice was calm, but his eyes blazed. Are you prepared for this? Every instinct screamed, run, hide, let someone else fight this battle. But Evelyn thought of the past 3 weeks, the books she'd read, the rides she'd taken, the person she'd been rediscovering. Yes, she said, rising, I'm ready. The formal drawing room was deliberately intimidating. Constance stood near the fireplace in mourning purple that somehow looked triumphant. Lord Whitmore lingered by the window, his expression carefully arranged in false concern, and Sir Edmund held a leather document case with officious importance. Your Grace, Constance's voice trembled with what might have been genuine emotion if one didn't know her. My stepdaughter's welfare is my paramount concern. Recent events have made it clear she requires specialized care I've been unable to provide. Sir Edmund opened his case. I have here sworn testimony by Dr. Bartholomew Pike regarding Lady Evelyn Hargrave's mental condition. The doctor has documented several episodes of hysteria and concerning instability over the past 6 months. Evelyn felt the room tilt sideways. Victorian law pressed down like a physical weight. Women could be committed on far less evidence than this. Before Alexander could speak, Evelyn stood. No, I will speak for myself. The room went silent. Alexander's eyes met hers with a question. She gave the smallest nod. I can do this. I must do this. Sir Edmund, you mentioned Dr. Bartholomew Pike. I'm curious, when did Dr. Pike examine me? The magistrate consulted his papers. According to these records, he documented episodes on March 14th, April 2nd, and May 27th. Dr. Pike has never examined me. Evelyn's voice grew stronger. In fact, Dr. Pike was dismissed from medical practice 2 years ago for falsifying patient records. There was a hearing before the Royal College of Physicians. I can provide documentation. The magistrate's face reddened as he shuffled through his papers with increasing agitation. As for March 14th, Evelyn continued, I was in London meeting with my father's solicitor, Mr. Henry Blackwell, from 10 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Mr. Blackwell can testify to my complete lucidity. She turned to face Constance directly. Each incident you fabricated, I can refute with witnesses and documentation. Would you like me to continue? The drawing room doors opened, and Mr. Blackwell entered carrying a substantial document case. Your Grace, my apologies for the delay. The documentation took longer to compile than expected. Over the next hour, Blackwell systematically dismantled Constance's case. He presented evidence of embezzlement, forged signatures, fraudulent land sales. The sum was staggering as she crumbled around her schemes. Sir Edmund hastily distanced himself, stammering apologies. Lord Whitmore had already fled. "Leave my property," Alexander said with absolute finality. "Do not contact Evelyn Hargrave again. If you set foot on Weatherby land, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." After they left, Evelyn stood rigid, processing what had just happened. Then her body remembered how to move, and she began trembling violently. "You were magnificent," Alexander said quietly, taking her hands. "Absolutely magnificent." 6 months. Alexander had given Evelyn 6 months to discover herself, and she'd used them well. She returned to Hargrave House with complete legal control of her estate. She implemented her father's agricultural reforms, opened a school for tenant children, and proved to herself that she could stand alone. She also discovered something crucial. Independence didn't mean isolation. It meant having the strength to choose connection from a position of power rather than need. At the Hartfield ball marking the season's end, Evelyn stood at the entrance in a midnight blue gown, her father's pocket watch gleaming at her throat. The same society that had witnessed her humiliation 7 months ago now watched her enter with confidence and grace. Alexander was there, of course. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom with the same charged awareness from that garden party, but transformed now, not desperate or uncertain, but deliberate, chosen. Lord Hartley proposed during a waltz, offering everything a woman could want in a husband. Evelyn refused him gently, knowing her heart belonged elsewhere. As midnight approached, she slipped onto the terrace. Alexander found her there, starlight catching in her dark hair. "Are you going to ask me, or shall I ask you?" His surprised laugh was exactly what she needed to hear. "I've been planning this moment for months, and you're taking charge of it. Partnership means either of us can lead." Alexander took her hands, and they were visible from the ballroom. Another public moment, another choice made in full view of society. "Evelyn Hargrave has agreed to become my wife. I trust we have your support." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. 3 months later, they married in Weatherby's intimate chapel. Evelyn wore cream silk and her father's pocket watch. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promises of partnership, equality, mutual respect. Time indeed had revealed all truth, that strength comes from within, that love is choice, and that the greatest freedom is finding someone you choose to share it with, not because you must, but because you want to.